There's a sign that you may have seen outside the Methodist Church as you're passing through Moundville. I've actually had to make sure that I've looked both times to see what the whole thing said. I was glad to know I got the second part of it right. But this is more or less what the sign there says. It reads, "A Christian believes God does not love us because we are good, but that God makes us good because He loves us." And that's a good lesson for us all to remember, because we often fall into the trap of thinking that we not only have to act a certain way, but that we have to be a certain way. Sometimes it's easy to feel, unless we are some sort of great holy person, or at least that we seem to be so, God will not care about us. But that's not what we hear in the gospel this morning. In the parable Jesus tells, we have two characters, the Pharisee and the tax collector. Now, to many of Jesus' listeners, the Pharisee would have been a person they would have liked to be like. The Pharisees were strict observers of the law of Moses, and that made them what many would consider to be holy. And the Pharisees themselves were very important people. They had a huge impact on us as Christians, not least of all because our patron saint, the saint whose name is right above me on this pulpit, was a Pharisee, and a very good one, and one who tells us, and one who we even see in Acts, was a very good follower of the law. Now, on the other hand, we have the tax collectors, who would have been seen as pariah in Jesus' day, as they often are in our own. But in Jesus' time, this would have been even more the case, that people did not like tax collectors, because they were even worse than what we experience today. In Jesus' time, these tax collectors were working directly for the Roman Empire. Now, the Romans only prescribed that the collectors get only what they were giving back to the Romans. So, in order to get any money for their own livelihoods, tax collectors had to collect more than the Romans asked for them to give back to them. And many tax collectors went the route of temptation because people had to pay their taxes. So what they did was they bled those around them dry. They taxed them for just about every penny they could. And in Israel specifically, that meant that it was Jews as tax collectors taking everything from other Jews, their own people. So, given these dynamics, the tax collectors as pariahs and the Pharisees as held up as holy, we would expect that God would favor the Pharisee, because they're people who live openly righteous lives, while the tax collectors were parasites to those around them. But that's not what we see in this reading, because it is not just how these people are on the surface, how holy or not they seem, that matters to God, but instead it is the relationship that they have with God and their neighbor. The Pharisee, while following the letter of the law, does not follow the heart of it. The heart of it which we read at the beginning of this service this morning in the summary of the law. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. This Pharisee clearly does not love his neighbor. He sees himself as above his neighbor. And his prayer to God in this parable isn't about how he can continue to become closer to God. Instead, it is purely selfish and about how he's the best. The tax collector in his prayer is very different. He knows what he is. He knows what he has done. He doesn't hold himself up to God. Instead, he just asks that God will show mercy on him, a sinner. And it is this man, Jesus tells us, who comes home justified. And the reason that he's able to do that, the reason that this tax collector comes home justified, is because he doesn't try to present a false version of himself. He doesn't try to put forth a show of following God's commandments without really understanding the heart of them, as we see with the Pharisee. He merely comes to God just as the person he is. And that is what we are called to do. To come, as we will soon see in one of our hymns for the offertory, to come just as we are. Those who God chooses to bring in. Those who God chooses to die for, so that we could rise to new life with him. God doesn't love us because we are good. Because, as we, like the tax collector, know, we're not. We all struggle. We all fall. We do those things that we know we shouldn't. And we mourn over those things we wish we hadn't done and that we wish we could change. But it is God who comes in and makes us whole again. It is God who helps restore us to relationship with him, to make us better, to make us good, all because he loves us. God isn't asking us to be something we're not. He's asking us to come to him just as we are right now, in order for him to renew us in relationship with him, in order to make us whole. Now, this isn't to say that we don't have to change. We do. Because a tax collector doesn't come to God accepting what he did. He comes to God realizing he has done something wrong. He comes to God asking for help. And that is what we are called to do as well. To come to God, realizing what is good in us and also what is bad. We are called to come to God, asking him to transform all that we are, so that we can be restored in relationship with him, so that we can be truly good. and for our transformation through the love of God, we can truly say, thanks be